Well, thank you for the invitation to participate in this symposium. This is a work collaboration between SOPI, the Puerto Rico Ornithological Society, and the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, along with my colleagues Chris Rimme and John Lloyd. And I'm going to talk about short-term effects of hurricanes Maria and Irma on Puerto Rican forest birds. As we heard yesterday, hurricanes are a major component of Caribbean ecosystems, and it is widely accepted that Caribbean species are well adapted to cope with such natural events. To prove that, nature threw two major hurricanes during the month of September 2017 to Puerto Rico. Hurricane Irma, a Category 5, and then 2 weeks later, Hurricane Maria, which they say a Category 4, though I think it was more like a Category 6. And you can see down below the path of Hurricane Maria, basically across Puerto Rico, and it caused major impacts throughout the whole island. When I was watching 60-foot hardwoods break like twigs, I was trying to figure out what will happen to all the forest birds in Puerto Rico after such a major storm. Well, luckily, we did have some way of trying to figure it out, since in 2015, we conducted island-wide surveys for big-nosed thrushes in Puerto Rico. And we also took information, on winter resident birds throughout our surveys. For those surveys, we were able to go back in 2018. We had randomized block design in which we had 43 1 square kilometer blocks. And we established between 2 and 3 and 5 point count stations in each, for a total of 211 in 2015. And we were able to revisit 202 of those stations in 2008. I'm gonna skip this. Here you see a map of Puerto Rico, and we can look at the location of their sampling blocks. And now you can see that it is pretty much a wide, island-wide survey, which is something that most other studies have not been able to do, and they have been relegated to a particular forest in the island. Though it is obvious that it is biased for the Central Cordillera, which is still a pretty large survey area anyways. For our analysis, we look at it as a dynamic community model in which we look at years, differences in year, detectability, site-occupancy, all within a Bayesian framework. We were able to collect enough information to analyze and include 35 species of forest birds. Any species that were found in less than 5% of our point counts were not selected for the analysis, nor were raptors and water birds, which require different methods for surveys. Our results show that there were no significant differences in species composition between years. But we did see there was a significant difference in detectability. Interestingly, those differences began to change throughout the year, and we saw a slightly significant yet constant increase in detection throughout the length of our study, probably associated to the recovery of the canopy and understories. And we saw that 50% decrease of the species decrease in site-occupancy, and those decreases were in a higher proportion and magnitude than any of the increases. We also look at differences between diet types. We found that increases were mostly associated with granivores and omnivores, such as the Puerto Rican woodpecker on the far right. We also saw that decreases were mostly associated to frugivores and nectarivores, such as the Puerto Rican spindales and the Antillean mango. Here we see all the species that show some form of increase in detection, and those with the blocks are those that were significantly different. I just want to point out, looking at the right-hand corner, top right-hand corner, the black-faced grasskid was the species that showed the highest increase for all the species. Species of interest or that had some interesting results was the Black-whiskered Vireo huliachivi, which is a species usually associated as a frugivore, but they were significantly increased in 2019 in terms of detection. Basically, this species is a migrant that was not in the island during the passing of the storms, but actually started coming back between February and March during our field season. Here we see species that show decreases, and we can see as a larger number of species, and also many more that show significant decreases in the red squares. I want to note that in the top right-hand corner, the banana quid, which is one of the most common and abundant species prior to the hurricanes in 2017, were very, very difficult to detect during our study survey, especially during the first few weeks of the study, especially in the higher elevations. Another species of interest is the scaly-nape pigeon, which is also a very common forest bird, but they were practically absent from our study sites, especially in the mid to high elevations. Notwithstanding, it is also interesting that CBC, the Christmas bird count data, showed sometimes 100% increases in the number of scaly-nape pigeons in the lowlands prior to our surveys and beyond. Another species that suffered quite a bit was the Antillean euphonia, down in the lower right-hand corner. This species is highly associated with mistletoes, which pretty much were blown off trees or fell when branches and trunks snapped during the storm. And that apparently caused a high effect on the species, which at present it still hasn't recuperated to pre-hurricane numbers. In conclusion, we see that Caribbean birds are resilient. In contrast, if you see in the picture is a northern red bishop. This is an introduced finch from Africa. And these, like other exotic birds in Puerto Rico, suffer greatly and also even probably total extirpation from the island after the hurricane. We also saw that responses are species specific, and also that changes in forest structure are an important factor that regulates the response of the different species. We also found that decreases are likely to be temporary. And the group that showed the most negative impacts were the frugivores. In our results support previously published studies, some of those that have been presented in this symposium. I want to thank all of these organizations for providing funding for our fieldwork. A special shout out to Lisa Sorenson of Birds Caribbean for helping us find and attain financial support for our 2018 field season. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jose, for a nice presentation. I have some questions, but let's see here. Some questions have popped up here, and I can ask them to you. The first one is, did you notice other species? Can you hear me, Jose? Did you notice other species with the same pattern, such as the scaly-nape pigeon, that is, moved to the lowlands?
Apparently, a lot of different columbids, like white-winged pigeon, the white-winged dove, and the white-crowned pigeons, which are not really associated in the mountains, but still in the mid elevations are found. And there were real big increases according to our Christmas bird count data.
Okay, thank you. Second question here, did you note any decreases in the Puerto Rican plain pigeon after the hurricane?
Well, we did not find any plain pigeons during our surveys. And although we did check some areas where we have there are reports of the species. On my observations, the plain pigeon has been extremely difficult to find, and only in a very particular area they're still around in very low numbers. So practically a couple of 2 or 3 areas in the island. And I haven't seen one really.
Well, that sounds consistent with Frank Rivera's surveys also. So he has a lot of concerns for the plain pigeon on the island. Were there any? Okay, here question just popped in. What about white-crowned pigeons? Can you comment on their numbers?
Well, white-crowned pigeons were present in the same areas in 2018 that where we found them in 2015. The numbers were pretty much consistent, but looking at Christmas bird count data, the numbers really skyrocketed during the following 2 counts after the hurricanes. And now we've seen that the numbers are starting to level, and the birds are really still fairly common in many areas of Puerto Rico, even San Juan, where they're being seen with pretty much a lot of frequency in the mangroves.
Okay, well, excellent. I think we're running out of time here, but I thank you for your presentation and your comments, and hopefully you'll make some comments the end of the day on Friday, or today. So thank you very much. So let me